Good afternoon, everybody. It's really great to be here today. Over time, philanthropists in America have achieved enormous success for nature and our country. You all have a lot to be proud of. On behalf of my organization, the Nature Conservancy, or TNC for short, and really on behalf of all environmental nonprofit organizations, thank you for your leadership, thanks for your support, thanks for all you've helped us accomplish. Now, my job today is, though, to look at the future. And I'll admit, the future can seem a little bit daunting when we think about nature, especially these days. But I have good news for you. My organization, TNC, is a science-based organization. And we have a rigorous, no-nonsense, science-based plan for how to build a sustainable future. That's what I want to talk about today. I asked our scientists to take a hard look at whether we really can have it all. A future where people get the food and energy and economic growth that they need without sacrificing nature. And the answer is yes, if we do things right. We looked at two paths, business as usual and sustainability. In both scenarios, we make the same assumptions. By 2050, human population growth grows by about 40% to 9.7 billion people. The global economy grows a little bit more than 3% per year. Demand for food grows about 70% faster than population growth because as billions of people are lifted out of poverty, they transition to better diets. And energy demand also grows by about 70%. So please note, we're making no heroic assumptions. We're trying to be very realistic. Now, let's see what happens to people and nature on each path. What happens in business as usual? Well, it's ugly, and there's a lot of suffering. Global temperatures rise by more than 3 degrees Celsius. Some 5 billion people will face significant health challenges from air pollution. Only 40% of global fisheries are sustainable. The rest collapse. And only a very small percentage of land, about 1.4%, is protected for nature. What about the sustainability path? Here, things are much better, thank goodness. Global temperatures rise by only 1.6 degrees. Less than 1 billion people face major impacts from air pollution. Still too many, but much better. All of the world's fisheries are sustainable, and 17% of land is available for nature, a huge win for biodiversity. So the second path, of course, is what I want to talk about today. Now, for sure, taking this path isn't going to be easy, but our compass points us in a clear direction, and our conviction is very strong. Now, at this point, you might be asking yourself, especially here in Washington, D.C., is this guy a dreamer? Did he miss the recent election? No, I didn't. Let me tell you, the biggest thing I've learned in 9 years on the job at TNC is this. When we draw on science, pragmatism, and passion, we can win. When we focus on protecting and investing in nature, we really can rise above divisiveness. We are able to find common ground. We can bring diverse groups of people together to tackle big challenges together. We've done that over our history, and that's exactly what we intend to do over the years ahead. So, how exactly do we get on this path to sustainability? There's lots we need to do, of course. But our science tells us we need to focus especially on 3 big areas: addressing climate change, food, and cities. Our science team also tells us that nature can make a huge difference in each of these challenges. In other words, it's nature to the rescue. I'm going to talk about each of these 3 challenges in a minute. But first, let me just share a little bit about TNC so you know where I'm coming from. First, let me say there are many great environmental nonprofit organizations. I know them all. We partner with all of them. We have great respect for them. Each of us NGOs were a little bit different, so let me tell you a bit about TNC. We got our start 65 years ago when a small group of determined scientists joined together to protect the Mianus River Gorge in New York. Here they are. These scientists wanted to protect a very important forest. They wanted to do it in a way that would really endure. They considered every alternative they could think of. In the end, they decided the best way to do it was to simply buy the land. So the scientists mortgaged their homes. They cashed in their life insurance policies, and they bought the land. And in that very direct way, they protected the forest forever. And voila, TNC was born. Ever since, our formula for success has been the same: science-based, pragmatic, and passionate. From there, and this is a great American philanthropic success story, we grew fast. We branched out to all 50 states. So we've got a chapter in every state, blue states, red states, you name it. And then we grew to some 70 countries. Today we have 4,000 people on our professional team. It only could be done with American philanthropy. We became leaders in marine, freshwater, urban conservation, and climate change. We took that Mianus Gorge model, we really tried to take it to scale. And thanks to many generous American philanthropists, partners in civil society, and people from all walks of life, we've been able to protect extraordinary amounts of nature all around the world. But along the way, we realized we really couldn't buy our way to success. We learned that to stay ahead of the curve, we'd need to keep innovating and changing. We learned to address new threats. First, they were threats like habitat fragmentation, altered fire regimes, and invasive species. And today, we're taking on new and big challenges like climate change, urbanization, overharvesting of forests and fisheries. We found we've had to stretch our organization again and again, more recently adding the need to save people to our mission along with saving nature. We're using new tools, economics and social science, impact investing, guiding businesses to do things in a better way. This way, we can try to find non-zero sum or win-win strategies that can benefit both nature and people. Through all that growth and change, however, our most important tool remains the same: bringing diverse groups of people together to find the common ground that will allow us to tackle big challenges effectively. It's that skill that allows me to be today confident as I look ahead. Now let's get back to those three big challenges I mentioned earlier: climate, food, and cities. To be sure, I'll start with climate. The most important task here is that humankind needs to continue to make very rapid progress, shifting from fossil fuels to renewables, and we need to make rapid progress on energy conservation. At TNC, we're doing everything we can on that front, but today I'm not going to talk about energy. Rather, today I'm going to talk about the role of nature in addressing climate change. We think this is less well understood. If I may, I want to give you one very important number to remember: 1/3. We've determined that we can achieve more than 1/3 of the global emission reduction goals we have by investing in nature. This includes protecting forests, restoring degraded farmlands, and changing the way working lands are managed. These strategies not only offset carbon emissions, they also improve water, they bolster biodiversity, and they improve livelihoods. This is the kind of opportunity that everyone can get behind. Now, if it sounds too good to be true, let me tell you a story that demonstrates we know how to pull this off. About a decade ago, increased soybean production was destroying the Amazon forest. Now, the Amazon not only plays a huge role in stabilizing climate, it's also important habitat for biodiversity, of course, and it's the important home to many people. Fortunately, in this case, a very diverse group of players came together and successfully reversed deforestation of the Amazon. This is a great success story. The story starts with Greenpeace. Greenpeace pushed McDonald's to stop buying soy linked to deforestation. McDonald's then went to its supplier Cargill and told them to figure out how to source soy sustainably. Cargill called TNC for help. We, in turn, set up a program to help the government monitor compliance with Brazil's forest code, which at the time was mostly ignored and unenforced. We also trained farmers on better practices. In turn, TNC and Cargill got the other big international soy traders in the game. What we were able to do, and this is really what we always try to do, is we built a broad coalition. We brought together big and small farmers, municipal, regional, and federal governments, numerous local and some international NGOs, activists, scientists, and big global companies. The result? The Soy Moratorium, a sweeping agreement that reduced deforestation in the Amazon by 80%. That's right, 80%. That reduction means that greenhouse gas emissions today are 2 or 3% lower than they would otherwise be. So, a very encouraging story, right? So why haven't we done this in every rainforest around the world? That's our job ahead. And that's where I hope American philanthropic ingenuity and all of you will come in. What we need to do is we need to collaborate with business, community groups, academics, activists, investors, you name it, and find ways to finance and scale up this work. We'll also need to work with governments to change the rules of the game to incentivize the behavior we want to see happen. At TNC, we are focused like a laser on making all of this happen. So this is a climate success story, but it's also linked to another of the three areas we need to address: food. I already mentioned, as the world population grows, we'll need to increase food production by about 70%. But we'll need to do it with less water, less fertilizer, and without expanding agriculture's footprint. And we'll have to do it in a climate-smart way. This is complicated, but it's doable. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Tim Smith. I first met Tim just a few months ago when I visited his farm in Iowa. Tim's father and grandfather were farmers. He hopes his kids and grandkids will be farmers too. Tim views himself as a good citizen and as a good steward of the land. He cares deeply about nature. Indeed, his livelihood depends on it. Tim got to know the local TNC team, and he learned there were new farming techniques that could make a big and positive difference. Practices like no-till or reduced-till farming. Practices like using covered crops to cut greenhouse gas emissions, reduce erosion, and curtail nutrient runoff. So Tim said he'd give it a try. At first, Tim was teased by his farming neighbors for taking this new and somewhat weird approach. But now, one by one, his neighbors are following Tim's lead. Today, nearly 1 in 4 farmers in Iowa are using cover crops, and nearly half of Iowa farmers are using no-till farming. They're discovering that healthier soils produce higher agricultural yields. They sequester carbon. They hold water more effectively. They save farmers money on irrigation, and they prevent fertilizer runoff. So it's in farmers' and everyone's best interest to see these best practices spread. Unfortunately, time's not on our side here. Most soils have lost up to 70% of their organic carbon. Bad for farmers, bad for the environment. So we must act with urgency. How do we make this happen? It's people like you who can make the difference. People like Farmer Tim and people like Craig McCaw. Craig serves on the TNC board, and he's part of the Giving Pledge group. A few years ago, Craig made a substantial philanthropic contribution to TNC, which got our Healthy Soils Initiative off and running. There's enormous opportunity for us to take these kinds of practices across the US and around the world. So transforming agriculture will be really important. It's also going to be critical on the food front that we transform fishing practices. As I showed you, in business as usual, fish stocks will be wiped out. It doesn't have to be this way. We're able to show fishing communities, governments, and consumers there's a better way to do things. We can fish in a sustainable manner and feed a growing population. You might think, I'm dreaming again, but we've done this. Take California's Morro Bay, for example. The fishing industry here was in steep decline. So after trying everything else, TNC finally purchased some boats and vessels, and we actually joined the fishing community. At first, the fishers scratched their heads and said, what's with these environmentalists? What are they doing here? But over time, we got to know one another, and we were able to show how improved fishing practices resulted in higher income for fishers and better outcomes for the fishery too. Again, win-win. It worked. Morro's fishery has totally rebounded. But that's not enough. Now we need to scale up to take on much bigger challenges. Challenges like the Pacific big-eye tuna fishery. Big-eye tuna stocks have crashed to 16%, 16% of their historic size. Again, this problem will sound daunting to you, but it's more manageable than you might think. In the Pacific, only a handful of island countries control about 70% of the big-eye tuna catch. So we're working with these nations to implement a cap-and-trade program. The idea is to incentivize fishers to not overharvest juvenile big-eye tuna that haven't yet had a chance to spawn. Fishers and their governments are on our side. They want fisheries to be managed sustainably, of course. Their livelihoods depend on it. They just need the tools and the common ground we offer to be more effective. And consumers want sustainable fisheries too. Of course, it's in their best interest to prevent these fish stocks from being completely crashed. Here I should note the generous support and leadership of Lyda Hill, another member of the Giving Pledge, and Lyda's here today. Lyda is one of the great champions for smart marine conservation, and we owe it to people like her for all the progress we're making and all the work we want to do going forward. Okay, so that's climate and food. Let me turn to the third piece of the puzzle, cities. Here I can be a little bit quicker, I think, because we've already heard a lot from Darryl, Austin, and Erin on exciting things happening on the intersection of cities and nature. But first, a few facts. By 2050, 75% of the world's 9.7 people will be living in cities. Now, cities could become profoundly unlivable places at the mercy of floods, storms, droughts, and polluted air. But there's an opportunity for a much better course. Cities can be designed to maximize sustainability, and we can use the power of nature to help cities cost-effectively manage the big challenges they face. Let me give you 4 examples of nature-based solutions for cities. 1, we plant trees to reduce urban heat, air pollution, and carbon emissions. 2, we restore and protect coastal ecosystems to combat floods, sea level rise, and storm surges. 3, we create green infrastructure to deal with stormwater runoff. And 4, we protect upstream watersheds to safeguard water supplies. Let me give you one example, this one in Quito, Ecuador. Here's Quito and its upstream watershed in the mountains behind the city. Instead of building an expensive new water treatment plant, my TNC colleagues were able to persuade the city to instead invest in nature. The city paid to change ranching and farming practices upstream. We planted trees, we reduced sedimentation into rivers, and we determined where investing in nature could achieve the highest return on investment. The city saved money. Investing in green infrastructure, that is nature, costs less and outperforms traditional plant and equipment. And great conservation was achieved at the same time. We've got 20 projects like this now running across Latin America, Africa, and China, and another 40 in the works. Looking forward, we're determined to inspire a radical rethinking of cities' relationships with nature. We're starting by reinventing the cities of today. Looking ahead, we're planning to help design the cities of the future in places like China, India, and Africa. So there you have it. The 3 big challenges we need to address to create a world in which both people and nature thrive. You might be wondering, if this is all so straightforward, then why haven't we already made more progress? Well, to put it simply, we need more leaders. Leaders who are willing to step up, think big, and follow their moral compass. Let me tell you about one of those people, Roy Vagelos, former CEO of the pharmaceutical company Merck. Back in the 80s, when Roy was CEO of Merck, he learned that the company's scientists had developed a cure for a disease called river blindness. River blindness was affecting millions of people, mostly in Africa. River blindness is horrifying. A parasitic worm enters the human body, swarms through the skin, and causes horrible itching, skin lesions, and ultimately blindness. Roy was told one Friday afternoon that a cure had been discovered, but unfortunately there was no way to commercialize it. Roy didn't hesitate. Without consulting his board, without even sleeping on his decision over the weekend, Roy made a heroic choice that day. He decided that Merck would simply provide the drug free to anyone, anywhere, for as long as it was needed. Today, river blindness has been nearly eradicated, a feat people thought would be impossible. I remember this all very vividly. At the time, I was one of those young business people who thought business could be and should be a force for good. So you can imagine my joy when just a few years ago, Roy joined the board of the Nature Conservancy. Roy and I now work very closely together. Roy continues to emphasize using science to advance badly needed social and environmental progress. And although Roy is now in his late 80s, he is relentless, pushing TNC and me daily so that we can make a strong organization even stronger and more effective. I know many of you are doing exactly the same thing for other great organizations, and that's the kind of leadership the environmental movement needs to succeed. So let me now end where I began. There are 2 paths in front of us. One leads to a disastrous future for people and nature. The other leads to a thriving, greener planet. Which path will we take? The choice is ours. I know the sustainability road won't be easy. We'll need to scale up our work like never before. But we've got a plan at TNC, and we have reason to think it's achievable. With smart science, collaboration, the engagement of leaders like Tim, Craig, Lyda, Roy, and many of you in this room, the path to a sustainable planet is clear and it's within reach. My colleagues and I at TNC and our partners at the many other great environmental organizations we work with, we all look forward to working with you as we together try to meet this challenge. Thank you very much.